Hello and welcome back to the channel. I am pleased to present another video in which we will discuss about regulatory strategy. This is the assignment that every professional working in the regulatory affairs department of a pharma industry needs to work on. I believe this video will be relevant to you if you are pursuing academic courses in regulatory affairs. It will be useful to you if you are starting a career in regulatory affairs, and if the regulatory has been newly added to your portfolio, learning about this kind of strategic planning will be helpful to you. Now, what exactly is regulatory strategy and why is it so important? Let's start with the basics. A regulatory strategy is a document prepared before starting with the new product development. For new synthetic drug molecules, the regulatory pathway is usually well defined. But when the product is a generic, a complex generic, or even a herbal formulation, and particularly when you plan to launch it in multiple global markets, the path is far less straightforward. That is where a regulatory strategy becomes critical. In this video, we are going to cover three key questions. Number 1, what is a regulatory strategy? Number 2, why is it important to have this document in place? And number 3, how do you go about preparing one? So let's answer the first question first, which is, what is a regulatory strategy? Regulatory strategy is a detailed forward-looking plan that outlines how a pharma company will develop, register, and maintain a drug product in compliance with the requirements of the regulatory authorities such as the US FDA, EMA, CDSCO, ANVISA, NMPA, and others throughout the product's life cycle. This document is typically created after the decision of developing new product has been made, but before any actual development work begins. It may also be prepared to support the global expansion of an already existing product. After answering the first question, let's see the answer to the second question, which is, why is it important to have this document in place? In other words, what are the advantages of this strategy document? First major advantage is it ensures that regulatory compliance is maintained at every stage of the product development. Second, it allows for early planning of submissions to multiple countries, which greatly supports international market entry. Third, with the help of this document, risks of regulatory rejection or delay can be minimized. Fourth, it speeds up time to market by streamlining project management and aligning cross-functional teams. It also helps in addressing scientific, legal, and regulatory challenges before they become bottlenecks. And finally, it provides a more accurate estimate of development costs, by which a better resource planning can be done. In some cases, the company may decide to not initiate this product development due to the high cost. In short, we can say about the advantages of this document that a well-crafted regulatory strategy acts as a roadmap. This aligns product development with regulatory expectations, supports timely approvals, opens doors to new markets, and ensures compliance even after the product reaches consumers. Now, in order to prepare a solid regulatory strategy, you will need to gather some essential information right at the beginning. This helps you start building this document with clarity and direction. First, you need to know the name of the product and the strengths in which it will be developed. Next, details like the dosage form, route of administration, and the therapeutic indication are also required to prepare this document. Then, of course, you will need the information regarding the target markets and innovator product. I am giving a simple format for the atorvastatin tablets for your understanding. These tablets are usually available in strengths like 10 mg, 20 mg, 30 mg, 40, 60 and 80 mg. So it is important to decide upfront in how many strengths do you plan to launch your product. What will be the target indication? What will be the target markets and relevant innovator? In the absence of this information, you cannot prepare strategy document. Next, we will see what are the typical contents of this strategic plan. We are enlisting all the contents first, and we will be discussing about each point in the subsequent slides. This document should typically contain product classification and regulatory pathway for approval as per regulatory guidelines of the target markets. The tentative cost involved for the approval is the next point. An innovator product should be identified at this stage if you are developing a generic or complex generic product. Further, for every market there are certain local requirements like qualified person for pharmacovigilance, qualified person in general, batch release site, etc., which should be identified for all the target markets. Additionally, the document should also include formulation development strategy, bioequivalence strategy, and identification of stability conditions for all the target markets. After enlisting the typical contents, let's spend a little time understanding each element of this document. One should start with the most critical steps first, which is product classification and identification of the regulatory pathway. Why is this step most critical? Because every other requirement hinges on how the product is classified. Now, while regulatory terminologies may differ slightly from one country to another, their core meaning remains the same. For example, if your product contains a new chemical entity, it will be classified as a new drug in most of the markets. But let's say the molecule is already approved and you are changing something, like introducing a new strength, a different dosage form, a new route of administration, a modified release profile, or even a new therapeutic indication. In all these cases, the classification changes. In the United States, such a product would fall under the 505(b)(2) pathway. In the European Union, it would be known as a hybrid product, and in India, the CDSCO would classify it as a subsequent new drug. Apart from these, depending on the composition and intended use, the product might also be classified as a herbal medicine, phytopharmaceutical, or even a medical device. Once the product is properly classified, the approval pathway becomes clearer. Most countries have well-defined procedures tailored to each classification. In the European regulatory landscape, there is an additional layer of complexity because the EMA serves 27 EU member states along with 3 European Economic Area countries, Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway. This means you have multiple options for seeking approval in Europe. If you are planning to launch in all member states, you can opt for the centralized procedure, a single approval that is valid across the region. If you are targeting selected countries, you might choose the decentralized procedure. In this route, you will designate one country as the reference member state or RMS and the other target countries as concerned member states or CMS. If the product is already approved in one EU country, you can use the Mutual Recognition Procedure or MRP to extend that approval to others. And if you plan to launch the product in just one country, the national procedure would be the way to go. Each of these decisions plays a strategic role in shaping your regulatory roadmap. And that's exactly what this document helps you define clearly and proactively. Now moving on to the next section of the document, roadmap and cost involved for approval. It is important to define the regulatory roadmap and applicable approval fees for each target market. This information can be obtained from website of each regulatory agency. This step might seem procedural, but in reality, it can strongly influence management's decisions about the target markets. For example, take South Africa. The regulatory approval timeline can take up to 5 years. That's a considerable delay, and not every company may be willing to wait that long before entering the market. Another scenario, if you are choosing the decentralized procedure in Europe, then each member state charges its own fees for reviewing the application. In such cases, companies often exclude countries with low business potential to optimize resources. That's why clearly outlining these timelines, costs, and market specific complexities in the regulatory strategy document is essential. It helps in making well informed strategic decisions right from the start. And if you have classified the product and defined the approval pathway, you will need to identify an innovator or a reference listed drug. Remember, if you are developing a generic or a complex generic, then as per the guidelines, you do not need to submit non-clinical and clinical data for the molecule, as you want agency to use the information which is already submitted by innovator of the molecule to the agency. Therefore, it is mandatory to identify the appropriate innovator, and the regulatory agency will be using this data only while reviewing your application. Now the question is, how will you identify an innovator? It is very to identify that. For US FDA, you can go to Orange Book, which enlists all the approved drug products. You can enter name of the molecule in the search bar, and it will enlist all the products which FDA has approved, and it will specifically mark those as RLD whose non-clinical and clinical data it has reviewed for granting the approval. Based on the similarity in dose, dosage form, route of administration, and appropriate RLD can be chosen. Similarly, for European Medicine Agency, the innovator can be chosen by checking the legal basis of approval for already approved products. This information is available in public assessment reports published on the EMA's websites. If the legal basis of approval is Article 8.3 of Directive 2001/83/EC, that means the full dossier for this product has been evaluated by the agency, and thus it is an innovator. Coming to the next requirement of the document, which is identification of local requirements. These requirements should be identified for both before and after product approval. Now, why is this emphasis on local requirements so critical? The reason is simple. A company may be headquartered in one part of the world but may wish to market its product in another region. Each government therefore has a responsibility to safeguard the health of its citizens. As a result, every regulatory authority frames its own set of rules and conditions that must be followed locally. For example, some authorities require local representative to act on behalf of the applicant company. Others may insist that the company establish a local subsidiary. In certain countries, the presence of a local scientific office is mandatory to ensure that adequate technical expertise is available within the region. It doesn't stop at pre-approval. Post-approval requirements are equally important. Many regulatory agencies require companies to have a well-defined pharmacovigilance system so that the safety of the product can be monitored continuously once it reaches the market. Similarly, some agencies require the identification of a batch release site, which ensures that the product being distributed complies with the quality and safety standards specified by the local authority. The next part of the regulatory strategy document is the formulation strategy. At this stage, the formulation development department of the organization may also contribute. For instance, if the goal is to enhance solubility, reduce the required dose, or mask the taste of the product, these objectives should be clearly defined in the formulation strategy section. For single strength products, the formulation development approach is usually simple. However, in cases where more than one strength of the product needs to be developed, the approach which will be used for the product development will influence many decisions. Whether all the strengths be prepared in a dose proportionate format or should they be designed in a look-alike format, that should be outlined in this document. The bioequivalence strategy, process development validation strategy, and stability study protocols, these all depend upon this approach. Another key step is to verify the official status of the active ingredients and its formulations. If monographs are already available in the pharmacopoeia, the process becomes relatively straightforward. In such cases, these official standards can serve as the minimum acceptance criteria for the specifications of both active ingredients and the finished product. Now, when it comes to inactive ingredients, if the F&D department has already provided a list of excipients, their permissible limits must be verified according to the regulations of the target markets. And if the proposed formula is not yet finalized, then the document should clearly mention the sources of information that will be used to determine the allowable limits of excipients. The contents mentioned in this part also becomes the basis for designing manufacturing formula, API, and finished product specifications. Defining bioequivalence strategy is a very important section of this document. Bioequivalence strategy will include tentative number of studies that will be required along with the number of subjects in each study. An approximate cost of the studies can be derived from this section. Bioequivalence studies or clinical studies are a major cost component in the overall product development cost. From this statement, you may understand the importance of the information given in this section. You can prepare this section based on the knowledge that you already have gathered regarding the product, formulation development strategy, release profile, and indication, etc. If the formulation development is based on the dose proportionate or look-alike approach, in that case, the lower strengths of the finished product get biowaiver, provided the molecule exhibit linear PK profile. The details can be checked from the ICH M9 or other country-specific guidance documents. Further, based on the release profile of product in question, number of studies can be decided. If it is an immediate release product, only one single dose bioequivalence study will be sufficient. But if it is modified release, then multiple dose study will also be required. You also need to carefully design the bioequivalence strategy for the drug products with non-linear PK, long half-life, and narrow therapeutic index. As I am discussing this, I feel that a separate video might actually be needed to cover this topic in detail. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see that too. The reason I say this is because we also need to consider country-specific regulatory requirements. These might be related to the prior approval of the study site. For example, when conducting bioequivalence studies for Brazil or Malaysia, the study center must be already approved by their respective regulatory authorities. Another important aspect is the origin of the reference product. It must come from the same country where the approval is being sought. Since Brexit, both Europe and UK require that the reference product be specifically procured from their own markets. They no longer recognize each other's approved products. Similarly, while many markets accept global innovators, some agencies such as Vietnam may specifically require the reference product to be sourced from the same manufacturing site that supplies to their country. Also in Brazil, there is a clause of pharmaceutical equivalence along with bioequivalence. In short, designing a bioequivalence strategy is a complex task and a lot of expertise is required for it. Lastly, we need to add stability conditions in the regulatory strategy document so that this data can be generated as per the target market's regulatory requirements. The stability conditions are defined based on the geographical location of the target market. The International Council for Harmonization, or ICH, is the organization that has divided the world into different climatic zones for the purpose of designing stability testing conditions of pharmaceuticals. The ICH has classified the world into four main climatic zones. Zone 1 is temperate climate. Zone 2 has subtropical with possible Mediterranean climate. Zone 3 has hot and dry climate, while Zone 4 has hot and humid climate, which is further divided into two subzones, 4A which has hot, humid, and Zone 4B which has hot and very humid climate. These classifications guide the long-term, intermediate, and accelerated stability testing conditions required during drug development and regulatory submissions. ICH has further issued guidelines for the stability studies. One can refer these guidelines for the identification of stability conditions. ICH Q1B should be referred to know more about photostability studies, and ICH Q1D should be referred to apply bracketing and matrixing approach to plan stability studies for a product that is being developed into multiple strengths and many packaging options. Apart from what has been discussed in this video, some more points can also be included in the regulatory strategy document depending upon the requirements of each management. However, the points that I have discussed today are the essential part of this document. Of course, you can't develop this document alone. You will need inputs from people working in different departments for this. Once you have gathered all the information, all you need to do is to compile it, give the references of appropriate guidelines, get it reviewed, and submit. That was all that I wanted to share with you about the regulatory strategy. I hope this has given you a clear picture of why it matters and how to approach to this document. As budding professionals, mastering this skill will make you an asset to any pharmaceutical organization. Remember, clarity, attention to detail, and awareness of global as well as local requirements are the key. Keep learning, keep exploring, and soon you will be confident in designing strategies that can guide entire product life cycle. And don't forget, your feedback matters. Share your thoughts and questions in the comment box and let me know if you like me to dive deeper into any specific part of this topic in future videos. Thank you very much.